Welcome back to Smith Coding and Design. Today we're going to go over some question and answers in terms of the guitar pick tray, some questions that I've received via comments, and also some process improvements. So the first thing we're going to get into is the vise setup. So I've received some feedback that maybe the way that I am joining one vise on top of the other might be slightly confusing. So another way that we can do this is we can put two vices on the same plane instead of joining them on top of each other. So I will go ahead and show you how to do that now. We'll start by deleting our soft jaw vise. And then what I'll do is I'll go ahead and drag in another soft jaw vise, and we'll keep them on the same plane. I'll zoom out a little bit, and then I'll drag it over, press enter, and then we'll go back to our home view. Now what I'm going to do is bring in our guitar tray model. I'm going to rotate it 180 degrees and move it up and out of the way. Press enter. And now I'm going to joint the guitar tray to our soft jaw. So I'm going to press J for joint. And just join it to the soft jaws as we would have in the previous tutorials. All right, there we go. So now we have our two vices on the same plane. And what we'll do, we'll take this a step further. We'll go ahead and go into our manufacturing tab. And what we'll need to do now is we'll need to adjust our setup as well as a couple toolpaths. So we'll go ahead and do that. So I will edit the setup. So what we're going to do is we're going to clear the model, and we're going to go back into our assembly, go through the drop down menu and pick the new pick tray model that we drug into our assembly. Next thing we're going to want to do is update the fixture. So we're going to select the fixture and select all the components from the latest vise that we drug into the assembly. Okay, that looks good. The next thing we're going to want to do is select our work origin. So again, I'm going to use a selected point, and I am going to orbit, and we are going to select the upper left corner of the soft jaw again. And then we're going to make sure that our axes are in the proper orientation for our machine. We will go to the stock tab, and we'll make sure we have from previous operation, or from preceding setup, which is what we do have. We'll click OK. And now you'll notice that it doesn't look like our stock carried over from the previous operations, and that is because we need to go ahead and generate all of our toolpaths again. So I'll go ahead and do that. It'll take a minute. All right, so now we will generate the toolpaths for our second op. And voila, you see that our stock has updated. And now, as we did in the previous tutorials, we can toggle back and forth between our two operations smoothly, which is what we want. Now, the geometry, if we step through our, let's zoom out a little bit. If we step through our toolpaths, the geometry for our facing and our 2D chamfer needs to be updated. So we will go ahead and do that now. So I will just click on the facing operation. Okay. I will go ahead and go to the geometry tab and clearly select the geometry. And now it automatically moved it over to where it needed to be. We'll look at our top heights. So we're 20 thousandths above the model top, which is perfect. That's where we wanted it from the previous tutorials. So we'll click OK. It should generate, and now you notice our facing operation is where it should be. And we also need to do that for the chamfer. So we'll go to geometry, we'll clear our geometry, and then we'll go ahead and select the outline of the pick tray, press OK. And now our chamfer has been generated. We can go ahead and simulate both of those operations just to make sure that we didn't do anything dumb. We don't want to ruin our part or ruin our end mill or crash our machine. All right, everything looks smooth there, so I'll stop that. We'll go ahead and then simulate the facing operation. And again, maybe speed it up a little bit. And as you can see, we face the tray, the guitar tray, without any issues. So I think moving forward, I will go ahead and proceed using this setup. It's a lot cleaner. There's a lot less orbiting. We still use 2 vices, right? My main concern is I like being able to have all of my operations sort of set up in one assembly so I can just easily toggle between them. So we'll go back to the design tab or the design workspace. That way we can, you know, just see how the setup looks compared to how it looked previously. Okay, so the next question I had, and let me zoom in here to the soft jaw setup, was why did I make the soft jaws hold the guitar sort of in a vertical fashion? So I'll use the example of a pop can, and so all the strength is in the vertical direction. If you can imagine crushing a pop can, it's much easier if you just squeeze on the middle. So my thoughts were, if I put the guitar in sort of a vertical position here on the soft jaws, I would be less likely to deform the guitar under the clamping pressure of the vise than if I turned it horizontally and squeezed in the middle. I could be wrong. That was just my thought process. So one of the final questions I had was, why did I use a 3/8 end mill rather than the shell mill to remove the hat of material that's left over during Op 2 when we flip our part? So let's go into CAM and let's examine that. So we'll go to our manufacturer workspace, and you'll notice the top hat of material is rather thick. I don't have a bandsaw at this point in time. I order my stock oversized and pre-cut so that I can do a number of projects with one size of stock. So that means I have a larger hat of material than would be ideal for actually making this part. And so my thought process there is, because this hat of material is so thick, I can just use my roughing end mill and remove that material much faster than if I were to take a bunch of passes with the shell mill. Now, it would be a different story if the hat of material was thinner and I could come down in 3 or 4 passes and remove that material. Then that would be the approach that I would take. However, because the way that my stock is sized right now, it's faster for me to just use that 3/8 inch end mill and go full depth of cut and take off that hat of material as fast as I can. And then I still use the shell mill after that just to get that nice, beautiful surface finish on the top. And the last question that I had was, why did I go 50 thousandths below the edge of the stock when I machined the top hat away on the back? So I'm going to show you something interesting. So if I go back into the adaptive clearing, and again, this is where I'm removing most of the material from the guitar pick tray. If I go to heights, and instead of minus the 50 thousandths, we'll just go 0. So our bottom height is just the top of our model. And so what I'm trying to avoid here is, you'll notice that I have this long, thin wall. And so if you've ever been in a situation where you're trying to machine this long, thin wall, you can run into a case where I call it the screaming howl of death. So you get a lot of resonance when you're cutting this thin wall, and then there's a nice loud pop when it all is torn off by your end mill and thrown on the side of your enclosure. So what I like to do, and again, maybe there's an easy way to do this, so if you know, drop it in the comments. So if I go back to my toolpath, so we'll right click and edit, and if I just go below, again, if I go below the top of my model, and it doesn't have to be 50 thousandths if you don't like 50 thousandths, it's just what I chose. We'll go 10 thousandths just for an example. So if I go below the top of my model. Now watch what the toolpath looks like. I get this nice smooth circular motion where there isn't this long thin wall that will cause resonance issue, and I have a risk of ripping that, or my end mill getting tangled in that thin wall and pulling my part out of the vise. So that was my reasoning for doing that. So if you ever run into a situation again where you kind of have this long wall that's going vertically across your part, you can try going below the top of your part just a little bit and see if your tool path updates to be slightly smoother in nature. All right, so that does it. So those are sort of the improvements. And again, so I already have the Pokeball ashtray tutorials in the works, so I won't update my vise setup for those. But going forward, I'll try to keep the vices on the same plane just so it prevents confusion and we don't have to go through all of the orbiting that we would have had to before. Thanks for tuning in. Please like and subscribe.